Hello, hello, welcome back. Just waiting for people to join. Good to be back. Okay, so now we're going to look at the 9 stages of calm abiding. Just to remind you of the key terms we've covered so far. We covered the term non-forgetfulness or mindfulness, which is actively remembering what you're trying to do, right? Which is, in this case, let's say holding your mind on the tip of the nostril and counting the breath. And then there's the quality of alertness, which is your mind being aware of its internal state. So, to use my analogy here, the mindfulness is remembering to hold the cup. The alertness is aware of how I'm holding the cup. Am I getting dull and sleepy and am I about to drop the cup? Am I getting so distracted that I'm about to let the cup go? Right? I completely forget I'm holding the cup and let it go. Or, am I holding the cup so tightly that I'm starting to shake my hand? So alertness is aware of what is the quality of what you're doing. How are you doing it? Right? So it's aware of how you're doing it, what the quality is. And the main things that alertness is looking for are the 2 qualities we just talked about in the previous session. Mainly what alertness is looking for is excitement and laxity. So just again to define excitement is this quality of mind that is a derivative of attachment, and excitement is when your mind, the coarse excitement or obvious excitement is when your mind is attracted to something other than the object of meditation during the meditation session and flies off the object out of your control in order to try to chase after the object of attachment. So I'm here holding my coffee cup and I see a beautiful sunset, and I become so enthralled by the sunset that I drop my coffee cup, right? Or like those funny scenes in movies where somebody's like eating a slice of pizza or something, and then a beautiful person walks by and they drop the pizza onto the plate while they're watching the, you know? So your mind becomes totally enamored with some object of attachment for a short period of time. This can be as short as 1 or 2 seconds. And it leaves the object of meditation, and then it may or may not come back. It depends on how capable you are. So that's excitement. Subtle excitement, which we're not going to have problems with, unless you're very capable. This is not a problem you're going to be facing. Subtle excitement is when your mind. I'm holding the coffee cup, but my mind is wavering a little bit, right? So I never let the coffee cup go, but my hand is like getting ready to let it go, right? And so the concentration is wavering just a little bit because my mind is like about to let the coffee cup go, even though it never does, right? And then there's subtle laxity, right? So coarse laxity is when you're, oh, sorry, I didn't do coarse laxity. So coarse laxity is like I get so dull that my mind, like, I don't let the coffee cup go, but like I'm barely hanging on. you know, I'm just like barely hanging on, and my mind is so dull. I'm not really paying attention to what I'm doing. Instead of just holding the coffee cup nicely. So this is when your mind loses cognitive freshness. You could experientially, it's a bit like getting bored. The mind is sort of kind of sinks, and it's very calm. It's very peaceful. The mind is not jumping off the object unless it gets really bad, and then you drop the object because you fall asleep, right? I'm like barely hanging on, and then I fall asleep and drop the coffee cup. That can happen, but that's really, really coarse laxity. So laxity is when your mind loses cognitive freshness. And then subtle laxity is when your mind is when I'm holding the coffee cup. My mind is very bright and fresh. My mind is not wavering even a little bit, but the quality of the concentration is not like absolutely stunningly bright and clear. I'm just holding it with a very high degree of lucidity, but it's not to its full potential in terms of brightness and lucidity. So when I haven't, there's no good way to illustrate this with the coffee cup, but when I don't have that stunning quality of absolutely perfect bright lucidity, then I have what's called subtle laxity. And we're definitely not going to be dealing with that over this 5 days. So without further ado, let's get into the 9 stages of calm abiding. So as I say here, I think this presentation is so brief as to not really be sufficient. And since I need to cover it in 25 minutes, it's definitely not going to be sufficient. You could spend months covering this subject, all right? The 9 stages are about attaining perfect concentration, okay? You will see the 9 stages taught if you look up the wild elephant taming diagram. You will see what sort of a graphic of what this training process looks like. It's similar to the Taoist wild horse taming diagram, although that's a little bit more broad than this. And the Zen wild ox taming diagram is also similar, but a little bit more broad than this. I believe those are those 2 diagrams, for those who are aware of them, they're a bit more about the entire process of training, whereas the 9 stages is just about training and concentration. It's not about the entire spiritual path. It's just about training and concentration. And I do have a link here for those who are interested to a really nice version of the wild elephant taming diagram. But let's jump straight into the presentation, okay? So let me slide over to the side, make sure you can see that. So you can see the 9 stages actually has nine stages, right? And I will read them out loud. The second stage is fixation with some continuity, fixation. The 4th is close fixation. The 5th is taming. The 6th is pacification. The 7th is complete pacification. The 8th is called single-pointed with effort. The 9th is called effortless pointedness. And then once you graduate from the 9th stage into calm abiding, then it's called calm abiding. And then you're actually meditating. Everything up to that point is training in meditation. Calm abiding is the first time you've actually meditated. If we're talking about samadhi, okay? If you're trying to attain what's called samadhi, like true single-pointed concentration, then calm abiding is the first time you've actually done it, okay? So this will be relevant. This presentation will be highly relevant when we start looking at, well, why did I select the types of exercises that I did to try to train you in the foundations of meditation? I think that will become much more clear after we've studied this presentation. Right. So during the first 4 stages of training and concentration, so that is setting the mind, fixation with some continuity, patch-like fixation, and close fixation. During the first 4 steps of training and concentration, you're cultivating recollection. In other words, mindfulness is the main thing that you're cultivating. And in particular, the first 2 stages, which is probably where most of us are, you have to use what's called forceful conveying. What does conveying mean? Conveying means bringing something towards something else. So you have to forcefully, intensely bring your mind to the object in order to set the mind on the object, right? So this is what stage one of trading in Shila's work and Tsongkhapa's work and a whole host of great yogi meditators who have access. In general, through the first 4 stages, it's not going to be very relaxing. Training and meditation in the first 4 stages where you're trying to get your mind to stay somewhere is not a very relaxing activity because it involves strenuously bringing your mind to the object. And then once you get to stages 3 and 4, I believe it's a slightly different, it's not quite as forceful, but in the beginning, it has to be very forceful to get your mind to the object. Okay? So stage 1, step 1, setting the mind. Initially, when you try to set the mind on an object of meditation, the mind seems suddenly overwhelmed with a barrage of thoughts. So some of you have been with me for quite a while and have come to me and said, I tried this foundation 1 thing, and now all of a sudden my mind is crazy. It's like I'm thinking all this stuff. I have all these emotions, and during the day, my mind seems like it's a total wreck. And I say, good job. Why do I say good job? Because when you first try to set the mind on the object of meditation, the mind seems suddenly overwhelmed by a barrage of thoughts, by a bunch of thoughts and a bunch of emotions, a bunch of images, a bunch of concepts, a bunch of memories. So the sign that you're getting close to actually accomplishing the first stage of training and meditation is that you come to your teacher and say, why does my mind seem way worse than when I started? In reality, this is how your mind was before you started. The unexamined mind, first of all, is not aware of itself. So this quality of vigilance or alertness, right? You have very little alertness. You're not aware of what your mind is like from moment to moment. You're not aware of exactly how you're holding the coffee cup, right? You don't have very good awareness of the quality of the mind holding the cup. Not only that, obviously, you can't hold the cup for very long. You're like a little kid with a ball. You ever seen a little kid with a ball? They try to pick it up and they drop it right away, and they try to pick it up again, they drop it right away. Then they can hold it for a bit, but then if they look at their mom, they drop the ball. So this is you on stage 1, but you're completely unaware of it, like a newborn kid trying to pick up a ball. So when you come to me and you say, my mind is a mess all of a sudden, I go, good job, right? Good job. You're making progress. So during this stage, the characteristic of this stage is that your mind will spend most of its time distracted by attachments or experiencing laxity and lethargy. So even though the primary problem we're dealing with on this stage is not laxity or lethargy, the mind will alternate between being like extremely tired and falling asleep and being completely distracted. So that's what the first stage of meditation is like, which is why it's not particularly relaxing. There's some disagreement on this in the literature, but roughly speaking, when you can hold your mind on your breath, when you can keep your mind on the breath without it jumping off completely for 21 breaths, then you've achieved the first stage. Okay? That's one way of describing when you have accomplished this stage. Another one of my teachers said, it's a little bit easier than that. Even though your mind is mostly wandering, when it's relatively easy to bring your mind back to the object, then you've attained this stage. And I think that may actually be a better way of describing this stage, and that's how I tend to think about it. So when it's relatively easy, like you're trying to focus on the breath, as soon as you start the session, bang, you can bring the mind to the object, and then it runs off and it's away for a while. But then as soon as you realize it's off the object, you go bang and you bring it right back. Then you've attained the first stage of training and concentration. Now think about foundation 1. What is the instruction for Foundation 1? As if your life depends on it, bring your mind to the object intensely with great focus. And as soon as you find that the mind has wandered off and left, bring it back. And we're counting. Why are we counting? Because the counting will give you more feedback. On whether or not you lost the object. Counting is not as good for training in concentration in the later stages, but in the beginning, your main problem is that your mind is jumping off the object constantly, and counting reminds you to bring the mind back to the object. You see? So this is why we're counting, and this is why we're using such intense, forceful attention. And there's no reason to sit there for 30 minutes doing this. So the reason that it's a 5-minute session is because we're trying to gain the ability to bring the mind to the object, and then to recognize when it's left the object and bring it back quickly. And so 5 minutes is enough to train that skill. And if you do several 5-minute sessions, you can gain that skill and be proficient in that skill in a relatively short period of time. Hence, why we're training in Foundation 1 in that way. So I hope that makes sense out of that. Stage 2, fixation with some continuity. So broadly, one of my teachers described this as when your mind can rest on the object, or hold the object is a better way of saying it, for up to 3 minutes. Another text by Chöden Rinpoche, who's a really highly accomplished meditator, spent 19 years in solitary retreat, said that if you can count a mala, and you're doing recitations of the mala, and you can do 108, which is the full mala, without losing concentration. And you can see now why I say, probably being able to count up to 21 breaths, even though I've seen that as the sort of qualifier for stage 1, probably fits better here in stage 2. So I would say if you can do most of a 5-minute session without losing the count and keeping your mind on the breath. So if we're doing Foundation 1 and you can keep the mind on the breath for 3 to 5 minutes without losing it, then you've attained stage 2 of training in concentration, fixation with some continuity. Okay? So on this stage, and some of you are probably pretty close to this already, when you lose the object, which means when your mind jumps off the object, then your mind still wanders around for a period of time before it realizes that it's lost the object, but you spend less time wandering around than you did before. Right? So excitement is still the dominant problem, coarse excitement. The big problem is your mind is still leaving the object at this stage. But now you're developing a little bit of vigilance and a little bit of alertness, vigilance, and a little bit of recollection, mindfulness, in order to move the mind to the next stage. So before we talk about the next stage, just a small note. From here forward, the mind is going to be spending more time on the object during a session than it spends off the object. So in these first 2 stages, your mind spends more time kind of struggling to stay on the object and then jumping off over and over again than it does actually staying on the object, right? In the next 2 stages and the stages going forward, your mind spends more time on the object than it does off the object. And so Papanka Rinpoche changes the description now of the type of attention that you apply, and he calls it interrupted conveying. So the mind is being conveyed or brought to the object, and it's interrupted from time to time by excitement or by laxity, right? And so the quality is now of your attention is now a little bit less intense than it was before. You don't have to bring that life or death attitude just to keep the mind on the object anymore. So stage 3 is called patch-like fixation. So what this means is it's a bit like, they say it's a bit like a cloth. So you have a cloth and there's like these little holes in the cloth and you're putting patches on the holes. So here's your meditation session and it's going along and we're going along and you're staying on the object. And then the mind leaves the object. You immediately realize that the mind has left the object and you immediately have the ability to bring the mind back. And then you're back to concentrating for a little while. And then there's another gap, there's another hole, and you have to slap a patch on the hole and then you carry on again, right? So this is patch-like fixation, where you're patching up the concentration over and over and over again. As you can see, the main problem is still coarse excitement. The mind jumps off the object, and then you have to bring it back. So you could here continue with Foundation 1, but here I'm also introducing Foundation 2, because this Foundation 2, now that your mind has the ability to mostly remain on the object, Foundation 2 does a better job of making your mind more calm than Foundation 1. Because there's such intensity required for Foundation 1, it's not as good, right? And because body scanning is just absolutely fantastic for making the mind calm, now that we're at stage 3, I'm transitioning us over to Foundation 2, right? Which should also make sense, because if you have the ability to keep your mind on an object, you now have the ability to scan through a number of different parts of your body, mostly without losing the object, which in this case is a continuous activity of scanning the body, okay? So technically speaking, vigilance or alertness notices right away when your mind jumps off the object, and then recollection or mindfulness remembers the appropriate antidote, in other words, to bring the mind back to the activity right away. This is what characterizes patch-like fixation. So that's how you know you've attained the third stage of meditation, is that you have enough introspection or internal awareness to know when your mind has lost the object, and enough mindfulness or enough recollection to be able to bring the mind back right away. So that's the third stage of meditation. The fourth is called close fixation. So close fixation is achieved when you, for an entire session of meditation, and I can't remember how long the session needs to be. I'm not sure if I have that here or not. They're a little bit less specific at this stage, but let's call it at least 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, right? The limitation here is that your mind will get tired from holding the fixation, and so it will start to jump off at some point. But at least for some period of time, you can hold the object of meditation completely without losing it for the duration of the meditation session. This is how you know you've achieved close fixation. And what this means is that you have overcome coarse excitement. You had this problem where the mind would jump without your control to other objects while you were trying to concentrate. You've achieved close fixation when that no longer happens, right? So what is the next problem that you have now that your mind stays where you put it? Well, the next problem that you have is that your mind begins to distract inwardly. And it begins to focus upon the sort of peacefulness that you get from having a mind that doesn't run and jump off and do other things. So when the mind starts to distract inwardly, then it starts to lose cognitive freshness. And this is not an exaggeration. I know from personal experience, and this is widely attested in the meditative literature, and there's even Western cognitive psychological literature on this now. If you sit in a state of concentration where you don't increase the freshness of the concentration, then your mind becomes stupider. You literally become dumber by sitting in this state. Okay? Your mind becomes less capable of seeing things clearly, discerning things clearly, understanding things clearly, because what you're practicing is a dull, stupid, undiscerning, cognitively incapable mind. So laxity now becomes the dominant problem. You've made the mind exceedingly calm, and now your mind is going to start falling into this sort of dull, uh, lacking freshness kind of state where it's distracting inwardly towards this calm state of mind. And so you have to re-emphasize that you hold the object of concentration with bright, fresh awareness. Okay? One way to generate bright, fresh awareness is to do analysis. So I'm already sort of giving you some, in Foundations 2, 3, and 4, I'm giving you some tools to keep the mind bright and fresh by training and opening the sense gates, by doing body scanning. Not only are you training in making the mind exceedingly calm once you already have some stability of mind, but you're also training in keeping the mind fresh. So I'm helping you to overcome this second problem for those of you who are maybe alternating between stages 3 and 4 on any given day. Okay. So again, the previous problem in previous stages is that your mind was distracted towards imagined attractive objects or sensory objects or remembered objects. But from the 5th stage onwards, the main solution is the main problem is not that your mind is distracted; it's that your mind is either dull or it's about to jump off the object. Right? It has a subtle tendency to jump, or it has even though it doesn't jump off the object, or the mind has become more dull. So to move from stage 4 to stage 5, you have to overcome the problem of the mind being dull during a session. Okay? So that's the meaning of stage 5. When you've overcome gross laxity, then you've accomplished stage 5. When you're sitting there for 20 minutes or whatever doing your meditation session, the mind does not become sleepy and dull and less discerning because you have been sitting in the session. And then the next stage, pacification. Now, we discussed other types of things that can pull you off the object of meditation. So there are, if you things that you find unattractive, regret. I'm sorry, not unattractive. Things that you're averse to, things you don't like. So the opposite of attachment, regret. There's a number of other things that can pull your mind off of the meditative object besides excitement, even though excitement is the main problem. And those are overcome on the sixth stage. And the main thing that you're overcoming on the sixth stage, as a general principle, a general rule, is that your mind is this subtle excitement. Okay, so the subtle excitement, which I've called here subtle forgetfulness, the subtle process of like water under the ice. Your mind that never leaves the object, but it has this sort of inclination to leave the object or inclination to generate unrelated thoughts and emotions and so forth. It's sort of bubbling in the background. The mind has these other tendencies that try to draw the mind off the object, and these are all pacified on this stage, hence pacification. Okay? Once that's overcome, the primary problem is subtle laxity. right? So the primary problem that you're going to have is subtle laxity. So here you're now overcoming this problem of your mind lacking this absolutely stunningly clear, vibrant cognitive freshness. So once that's been accomplished, you now finally, for the first time, in those moments where you have overcome coarse laxity, in those moments where you have completely overcome these 5 issues, right? You've overcome gross excitement, where your mind jumps off the object. You've overcome gross laxity, where your mind becomes dull and stupid. You've overcome subtle excitement, where the mind has this tendency to jump off the object, even though it doesn't. And along with that subtle laxity, you've overcome mental scattering, which includes regret and aversion and these other mental factors that can pull your mind off the object. And you've overcome subtle laxity, which is just your mind not being in an absolutely vibrant, lucid, incredibly bright cognitive state. Having overcome all 5 of those, you have now finally generated a perfect state of concentration. Right? The mind is now highly vivid. The mind is now highly stable. It has no mental scattering, no mental excitement, no subtle mental excitement, no subtle mental laxity. And so finally, you have uninterrupted attention. So up to this point, your attention towards the object has been interrupted by something. And Pabonka Rinpoche now says, finally, you can call your attention uninterrupted. You have the ability to bring your mind to the object in an uninterrupted way. Up until now, you haven't been able to do that, but now you can. Now, from here forward, the 8th stage is single-pointed with effort. What does that mean? Well, once you've achieved a state of concentration that has no subtle excitement, no subtle laxity, no coarse excitement, no coarse laxity, no mental scattering. Once your concentration has none of those problems, now you're in a state of single-pointed concentration. But it takes effort to maintain that state of concentration. So for some period of time, basically you can maintain that condition, but you'll get tired by doing it, and eventually faults will start to come back out. You'll start to experience faults again. You can maybe sit for, I don't know, I've never seen a number on it, but let's just call it 4 hours or something, right? You can sit for 3, 4, 5 hours without these faults coming up, and then the mind starts to get tired and these faults might come up again, right? So the faults have become so weak that merely looking for them makes them stop. The faults of your meditation have become so weak that simply the process of being aware of your own mind stops them from occurring without any additional effort to make them stop. What is the main problem you have? Well, you have built up a huge habit of applying antidotes to laxity and excitement. And so you have what's called over-application at this stage, where you're sitting there and you're really vigilant and you're going, oh, I need to make my mind more fresh. I need to make my mind more stable. I need to do this. I need to do that. And that process of trying to look for and apply antidotes has become so powerful that you're now applying antidotes when there aren't any problems. So the primary problem on the 8th stage, when you have single-pointed with effort, is that you begin applying antidotes when there aren't any problems. And you become over vigilant about the quality of your mind. And so the solution is finally, some of you are going, well, where's the relaxation, for goodness sake? I thought this meditation thing was supposed to be relaxing. Finally, we start talking about relaxing effort. Finally, we start talking about equanimity, right? Equanimity in the sense that we are no longer applying antidotes to these two big problems we've been having, whether the mind jumping or the mind getting dull. Those are the 2 big problems. Finally, we settle into a state of relaxation, and we concentrate and enjoy fully that concentration. Long before this, there's going to be bliss. Long before this, there's going to be a calm, wonderful, enjoyable state of mind. But here, finally, you can just rest in that state of concentration. Through learning how to just be comfortable in that state of concentration and not over apply antidotes, you eventually, through a lot of time and effort, achieve effortless single pointed concentration. Okay? Effortless single pointed concentration is then accompanied with a new type of attention that Pabanka Rinpoche calls effortless conveying. Now, just like raising your arm, you really don't think about it. It doesn't require any effort to speak of. The only effort is you think, I need to raise my arm. And then your arm just comes, right? So effortless concentration here means the only effort you need is just you turn your mind to some object and your mind immediately engages with that object with perfect concentration. And it can do that for hours, 12 hours, 20 hours. Eventually, however, even though effortless single-pointed concentration doesn't involve explicit effort to maintain the concentration, you can still get worn out doing this kind of meditation. The only way to overcome that and achieve the final stage, actual meditation, finally, calm abiding, is you need to spend a lot of time in effortless single-pointed concentration. So the only thing that's missing, according to the great yogis, is what they call mental suppleness, or mental and physical suppleness, which means that you have the ability to concentrate in a meditative state as long as you want. So you could quite literally sit there for a week or a month without moving, without needing to sleep, without needing to drink anything or eat anything. And there has been some studies on this kind of thing. Your metabolism drops way down. Your breathing rate drops way down. Your heart rate drops way down. And you could remain in a highly lucid meditative state doing work in your meditative concentration for weeks if you wanted to. That's what calm abiding means. In order to attain that capability, calm abiding, you have to train in effortless single-pointed concentration for a long period of time. So eventually, through training in perfect, effortless single-pointed concentration for a long period of time, your body and mind change in a particular way, and they develop what is called mental and physical suppleness. And there's a whole series of stages that goes through. First, when it first arises, it's incredibly pleasurable because your body becomes like really, really strong and capable and flexible. And your mind, you experience all of this bliss, and your mind is like unbelievably capable. The meditators talk about, like, you could visualize a whole mandala with 150 deities in it and shrink it down to the size of a mustard seed and put it inside the central chakra inside your body without even a single iris on any of the 150 deities changing color for a fraction of a second. And then you could take your mind and place it inside that drop, that little tiny mandala that's the size of a football field, filled with deities, and you could place yourself inside the middle of it and engage in various types of meditative practice. So your mind at this stage has this unbelievable lucidity and cognitive capability, right? And in the beginning, that's like intoxicating, and they call that moving pliancy. So when that pliancy is so intense that it's basically intoxicating, it's called moving pliancy. And eventually it settles down and it becomes less turbulent and less disturbing, and you get more and more familiar with it. And then they say it becomes a type of pliancy, mental physical capability that is compatible with concentration, right? At first, it'll disturb your concentration, and eventually it settles down and then they call it special pliancy, where you still have the pliancy, but it no longer makes your mind distracted. And then just for fun, to wrap it up, Lama Tsongkhapa, who is the founder of the Gelug lineage, who's a greatly attained yogi, he says, finally, at this point, after all this, now this is a student who could be called attentive. So a student who has this level of capability can finally be called someone who's attentive. Okay. So you now have an overview of the whole process of training and concentration. You should understand that we are very much beginners in this, even if we've been doing this a long time. And most of us are still struggling with probably stages 1 through 5, maybe 4 and 5 on our very best days, and sometimes falling back to, stage 2 or 3 on our bad days. So that's where we are. And hopefully you'll see that the foundations fit into that kind of understanding. Right. Okay. So I know that I ran over a little bit, but I wanted to get through the stages, and we will resume. Let me see here. We will resume at the actual time. We'll resume at 11, because then after 11 we have a long break. So we have a lunch break. During your lunch break, don't be naughty. Okay. I'll send you the link for this mind training document. Read over the stuff we went over today. Read over it, digest it, think about it. You can send me questions during the break time. Don't watch television and all this stuff. Again, hopefully you've taken your vows, and don't do a bunch of distracting stuff. You can do some exercise. You can, if you have work commitments or whatever, you can do those. But mostly you should be consuming content related to what we're doing here. Also, check when midday is. If you took Mahayana vows and you took them fully, you can't eat after the solar midday, which means when the sun is at the highest point in the sky. So make sure that you get your big meal in before then, your big meal of the day. Right. Okay. Without further ado, I will see you at 11 o'clock. I know it's a little bit tight, but this was a very, very, very important session. So in the next session, we'll do foundation. We'll talk about foundation 1 and do foundation 1. Then we'll have our big break, where you can study and read all these notes and things that we've been covering today. Okay? Have fun.